Did you know that Y represents vowel sounds more than it represents consonant sounds? It's true, and today we're going to take a look at Y as a vowel at the end of the word. Welcome to episode 19 of Phonics Rules for Teachers and How the Heck to Teach Them. I'm Martha, and today we're going to take a look at Y as a vowel. Specifically, we're going to be taking a look at Y at the end of a word or syllable, spelling the long E or the long I sound. Did you know that Y spells its consonant sound, the sound we hear in the word yes, in only 57 words? But Y spells a vowel sound in 2,041 words in the English language. That's right, Y spells vowel sounds far more often than it spells its consonant sound. So today we're going to look at when Y spells I and Y spells E at the end of a word or syllable in English. First, let's take a look at when Y spells the long I sound in an English word. In English, words typically do not end with the letter I. This is true unless a word has been borrowed from another language, for example, koi, which comes from Japanese, or if they are slang or shortened form of a word. For example, hi, which is a shortened version of the word hello. For this reason, when we hear the long I sound at the end of a one-syllable word, it is most often spelled with a single Y. There are 128 words in English that have this pattern where we have a single syllable word that ends with the letter Y spelling a long I sound. Some examples of this are buy, my, fly, why, try. Because these words are ending with a single letter spelling a vowel sound, these are considered open syllable words, which I have covered in a previous episode. If you want to learn more about open syllable words, you can check that episode out. Now let's take a look at when Y spells E at the end of a word. In English, we typically spell the long E sound at the end of a two or more syllable word with a single Y. This can include words that end with just a single Y, such as baby, angry, every, and icy. This can also include words that have the suffix ly, for example, happily, angrily, suddenly, scientifically, or nearly. In fact, Y spells the long E sound more often than it spells the long I sound. There are 1,628 words where Y spells the long E sound at the end of a word. There are a few exceptions to this rule, so let's take a look at those. There are some multisyllabic words where there's a Y at the end that spells a long I sound. Some examples are reply, multiply, and falsify. Sometimes we have compound words where we see this as well. A compound word is where we put two words together to make a new word. Some examples of this are dragonfly or hereby. Again, this is why when we explain these spelling patterns to our students, we use words like typically or generally or most of the time. If they know that they can spell both long I and long E with a Y, and they come to a word where Y is not spelling the expected sound, they know that they can try the other sound as an option. Now, if we're talking about Y as a vowel, we have to take a look at when we add endings to words because it can seem a little bit confusing or complicated. Understanding that Y is replacing an I or an E at the end of the word, there are some things to keep in mind. 1. Two I's cannot be next to each other in an English word. If the suffix begins with a letter other than I, the Y in the root word becomes an I. For example, happy becomes happiness, or puppy becomes puppies. If the suffix does begin with an I, for example, ing, the Y remains. Examples are cry becomes crying, baby becomes baby-ish, study becomes studying. This rule has what would be considered a large number of exceptions, but as you'll see, it's still a rather small percentage. There are 14 words that keep their Y when you would expect it to change to an I. This is only 1% of the words that are ending in Y in the English language. These words are buyable, buyer, dryness, flyable, shyer, shyly, shyness, slyness, slyer, slyest, spryly, spryness, wryness, and Riley. As you notice, many of these are the same root word with different endings. Now let's take a look at how to teach Y spelling the long I and the long E sounds at the end of words. I always say when teaching phonics to start with the simplest and the most common sound. However, when it comes to these sounds, I take a different approach. While Y spelling long E is more common, It is also found in 2 or more syllable words. This means it's a more complex spelling pattern because students need to be able to read multisyllabic words in order to work on this skill. For that reason, I begin by teaching why spelling the long I sound at the end of 1-syllable words. So let's take a look at how I do that. 1, I start by reviewing open syllables. Have students give some examples of open syllable words. No, go, she, we, for example. Then, say the word by. Ask your students what sound they hear in the word by, b and I. Ask them to help you spell each sound. After writing the B, you can remind them that they have already learned that words in English do not end with the letter I. Explain that when we hear the long I sound at the end of a 1-syllable word, we often spell that with the letter Y. Have students brainstorm some words that rhyme with by and write them up as well. Some examples are fly, try, cry, my, spy, sly, and fry. If they say words like pie and tie, you can write them down in a separate list. If you've already learned about silent E, you can remind them that we also use a silent E to prevent words in English from ending in an I. You can also share this visual with them to help them understand this skill. Then you can take some time to practice reading and spelling words in context with this sound. You can add this to your daily sound drill, take some time to map words, read decodable texts, have students create targeted journal entries, or use any of the 12 strategies that I've shared in Phonics Rules for Teachers. The more your students have the opportunity to practice reading and writing, the easier it will be for them to understand and use this concept. Once students have a solid understanding of why spelling I at the end of 1-syllable words, you can move on to teaching them that Y spells E at the end of 2 or more syllable words. I like to introduce this by comparing both of these spelling patterns. Write some words where Y is spelling I at the end of 1-syllable words, my, by, try, for example, and then write some simple 2-syllable words where Y is spelling E. For example, tiny, baby, and silly. Tell students that in these words, Y is spelling the long E sound. Practice reading the words together and explain that typically Y spells the long E sound at the end of 2 or more syllable words. And then of course from there, you can continue to practice. A great activity for this is to have students practice sorting words and mapping words in addition to having them use all of those activities and strategies that again, I've previously shared that you can use for any phonics skill. From there, continuing practicing this skill, both reading and writing until your students are confident and able to read and write words with both of these spelling patterns. And there you have it. That's how you can teach students that typically Y spells I at the end of 1-syllable words and Y spells E at the end of 2 or more syllable words most of the time. Thank you so much for joining me this week. I hope that you learned a lot, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss an episode of Phonics Rules for Teachers and How the Heck to Teach Them. See you next time!